Thanks, everybody. I'm so glad to be here. And oh my gosh, yesterday we saw from Greg and Daniel and Katie and Fatima and Emily and Artrell some really great ideas about how AI is starting to really shape the workplace in some interesting and meaningful ways. And I'd love to continue that today as we dive into thinking about how AI is impacting leadership teams in particular. I think that many of you may be on leadership teams, or you may be influencing leaders who are trying to drive AI adoption in their organizations and trying to wrap their arms around it. So that's what we're going to take a look at for the next hour or so, and I promise you it won't feel like an Ironman endurance event. And for those of us who are joining us virtually, welcome. We're so glad to have you here. I'm going to be asking you to jump in as well a couple of times, so pay attention as we go forward. All right, let's dive in. So, did you know that the average adult makes over 30,000 decisions every single day? Some of you are trying to decide right now whether you believe that or not. That's okay. You can check it out. We make a lot of decisions every single day. It's a really busy world that we live in. But we only put any real brain power between about 100 or 200 of those. That's still 6 to 12 decisions that we're putting some effort behind every single day. The reason this is important to think about is because we have these wonderful things called habits and routines that help us to really navigate this fast, complex, moving world that we're living in. Has anybody ever gone from their house to their office or school pickup and they have no idea how you got there? Yeah, we've all done that, right? That is habit, right? That's the power. Think of all of the decisions that you're making as you navigate that car from point A to point B, but you're doing it on routine. That's also, by the way, what makes construction zones so incredibly dangerous. Because you're working in a deep habit, a deep routine, and you're not thinking about what you're doing as you come into a new situation. That lands us in what we call the failure gap. And at Karrikins Group, we do a lot of work with this idea of leaders who are in the failure gap because their leadership habits and routines are keeping them from changing how they lead. Has anybody here ever really made a serious effort to make or break a habit? We all do it, like New Year's resolutions, things like that. It's hard, isn't it? It's so hard. Has anybody ever paid for a gym membership or a fitness app that you never used? Anyone? Yeah, I have. I once spent 15 months paying $70 a month for a gym that I went to twice. If you do the math, that's like $500 a workout. And neither one of those workouts were worth $500. I can promise you that. So we do it all the time, and it's expensive. And just in the United States alone, that's about a $400 million gap that people spend on gym memberships that they don't ever or rarely use. It gets really expensive fast, and it gets even more expensive when we see it with leadership teams. Has anybody ever been in a room where you've heard any of these things? Like, yes, this is our biggest priority. We're totally going to tackle this year. We should be going faster on that. I totally agree that's a good idea. Leaders are sitting around the table. Everybody's excited. We're like, yeah, this is it. And then nothing happens. Right? We're just like, okay. Who here is hearing this about AI right now? You're in leadership meetings where leaders are like, yes, we need to do AI. We need to do that AI thing, right? And then you're like, okay, great. We're all excited about it. And then nothing happens. That's the failure gap for leaders. And when we think about the failure gap, it's this space between agreement and alignment. We think it's a great idea. I really hope someone goes and does it. Right? We have a lot of that with AI right now. That sounds like a great idea. I hope that somebody else goes and takes care of it, right? So when we are in agreement as leaders, there's a lot of enthusiasm, but there's not a lot of action. And what we wind up seeing is that people don't reprioritize. They don't shift where assets are going or where investments are going. They don't change how they're leading and how they're helping their colleagues to really lean in and make the change that's necessary. It happens with all kinds of transformations, and we're especially seeing it right now when it comes to AI. Many of our clients are struggling with what does it mean to bring AI into our organizations as leaders. When we think about that, strategic misalignment, we know, is as expensive for businesses as those pesky gym memberships are for all of us as individuals. In fact, a McKinsey report from 2024 estimated that digital transformations leak about $2.4 or more trillion every single year of transformation efforts that come up short. So they don't fully deliver on the promised revenue gains or the promised cost savings. Does this ring true to anybody for the organizations that you work with? You're seeing like these transformations that don't quite get there. We've been seeing it for decades with transformations, especially digital transformations, and AI is tracking to these numbers or worse with a lot of the clients that we're working with. And for the folks who are jumping on virtually, maybe just pop in the chat a yes or no if you're seeing this too, as you think about the leadership teams that you work with or that you sit on. It's an expensive problem, this idea of misalignment across leadership teams. At Karrikins Group, we are fully committed to obliterating these numbers. We want every client to be in that 20% or that 15%, or actually we want those numbers to go up. We want it to be more than 20% of companies that are seeing those kinds of gains in every transformation that they do. And AI, again, is the one that most of the clients that we work with are trying to tackle right now. One of the things that we know gets in the way of leaders getting that full activation and really getting across the failure gap is that they spend a lot of time figuring out why they should do something. A why could be a mission, vision, purpose. It could be a board directive. It could be a competitive threat, a market change, something that customers are forcing on you. Whatever it is, companies tend to know, and we all as individuals tend to know why we need to do something. I know why I need to go to the gym because I want to get better, I want to be healthier, I want to be stronger. I know why I want to bring AI into my organization. It looks like it has a lot of potential, a lot of promise. There's a lot of capabilities there. We know the why. And organizations typically know what they need to do. Transformations have so many plans around them, right? There's detailed plans to say this is exactly what we need to do to be successful in implementing this particular technology or this platform or this new operating model or whatever it might be. As a matter of fact, I spent many years as a strategy consultant, and it was nothing broke my heart more than when I would walk into the office of an executive who had paid my company millions of dollars for this amazing strategy that we put together. And we would go through it, and the executive would be like, oh yeah, that's great. And then they'd reach behind him and grab a binder and be like, that's what the consultants told us last year. And oh, here's the one from 3 years ago. And here's the one from 5 years ago, right? They know what to do, but they're in the failure gap. They're not getting it done. They agree with it, but they're not getting aligned as leaders to take action and change what they're doing as a leadership team. That's why at Karrikins Group, we really focus on helping leaders to understand how to lead together in a way that drives the transformation. Because typically, if you think about if you think about digital transformations with technology behind them, the technology works 9 times out of 10. It's very rare that the vendor can't get their technology working in a particular organization. And we're seeing that even in the early days of AI. Vendors are pretty good at figuring out how to get the technology to work. So that's actually not where the biggest failure point is. The biggest failure point is really with the leaders in the organization getting activated for themselves around how they need to lead differently. And answering that question is the secret behind getting beyond 75% of the revenue that you have promised in your transformation, getting beyond 75% of the cost gains, and actually fully implementing and transforming your organizations. We see this as the missing piece in many of the transformations that we work with. And that's because knowing your what and your why is good. You have to do it. It's actually very important, but it's insufficient for full transformation of your organization. You also need to know how to lead differently in order to lead your organization into the future. Now, there is a lot of talk about AI right now as being the biggest change the world has ever seen. Has anybody seen those articles, right? Like, this is unlike anything we've ever seen before. Well, I'm in my late 50s, and I got to tell you, I've seen some big changes before. And I'm thinking all the way back to 1989, 1990. A lot of things happened back in 1989. Unless you've been living under a rock, you know that in 1989, Taylor Swift was born. Thank God for that, right? The Berlin Wall came down. Thank goodness for that, too. Tim Berners-Lee laid the foundation of the internet, of what we now know as the World Wide Web. There was a lot happening in 1989. Another thing that happened was this bright-eyed and big-haired girl was getting ready to finish college and get out into the working world. I'm so glad that Greg showed a picture of himself from the 1980s with a lot of hair. Where's Greg? Is he here today? We all had big hair in the 80s, right? But as I was coming out of college and into the workplace, for the first time, PCs or desktops were really taking over how we were working in professional ways. And this emergence was really interesting to me because as a young college graduate, my first job was with a startup that was taking advantage of this technology revolution that was fundamentally changing how we did business. And we were going into organizations and we were teaching people how to use things like Lotus 1-2-3. Anybody remember that? I see a few smiles. How about WordPerfect? Any WordPerfect people out there? Yeah. For those of you who are too young to know, those were the precursors to what we now know as the Microsoft Suite, or in some of the Apple applications, so word processors and spreadsheets. And I would go into organizations and I would teach classes to people about how to get their hands on the keyboard and start using these applications. And one of the things that was really interesting to me was who would come to the classes. It was typically secretaries, administrative assistants, data entry people, new hires, younger people in the organization. It was actually pretty unusual for a senior leader to come in and learn how to use these computers. What was going on there? Well, we were seeing a real divide happening around people who were perfectly willing to invest in what other people did being different. So they were willing to spend to have their people go take these classes, learn how to use computers, but they were the very important senior leaders in the organization. And they were not going to spend their time putting their hands on a keyboard, typing? What do you mean? I don't know how to type, right? I'm a very important, very senior leader. Somebody else does my typing for me. So that was a mindset shift that was holding people back from really engaging in this new technology that was changing the world. And by the end of the 1990s, everything had changed in business. We were seeing this massive shift. People who had taken the time to get to know how to use these computers, senior leaders who had taken the chance to put their hands on the keyboard, and maybe they were typing like this, but they were doing it themselves. They were embracing changing how they led. They were suddenly making decisions so much faster than their colleagues who were walking out with their dictaphone and trying to hand it off to a secretary who'd been reassigned to another place in the organization because their computer skills were more valuable elsewhere, right? So how you led needed to change. And for some people, that didn't keep up. And I think that one of the things that we're seeing today is that leaders are struggling with this in the AI construct as well. What do I mean by that? We see a lot of leaders who are willing to ask the question, how can AI change what other people do? So how can AI make my loan processing more efficient? How can it make my recruiting processes go faster? How can it take cost out of something in the organization? How can it change what other people do? And they're not asking the question, how can AI help me to be a better leader? That's a fundamentally different question for a senior leader to be asking. And there are a lot of mindsets and group dynamics that are happening around the senior leadership tables that are keeping leaders from asking this particular question. It's far more confronting to ask, how can this new technology help me to be a better leader, than it is to ask, how can AI change what other people are doing and make them more efficient, right? It feels different, doesn't it? One of the early reports that just came out in January of this year from Stanford, a guy named Nick Bloom published this study, tells us that almost 30% of leaders in organizations say they have never used AI. I don't think there's anyone in this room or virtually who has never used AI. Am I right about that? Yeah? But you probably know people who have never used it, don't you? Yeah, we're seeing this resistance happening at very senior levels in the organization where people are just like, yeah, I don't see a use for it. Almost 70% of leaders say that they spend less than an hour a day on it, which might be okay right now, but can you imagine if you spent less than an hour on your PC today? Right? And I go all the way back to the 1990s and those people who were not learning how to use computers. If by 2000 they weren't spending more than an hour on their computer, would they still have a job? Many of them did not, by the way, right? They had gone out of the workplace at that point. So we need for senior leaders to start leaning in and becoming users of the tools as well as investors in the tools, because that will help them to make better decisions and to build a culture in their organization that sees this toolkit as a valuable way to improve the work that's being done across the board and up and down the organization, rather than just being something that is shuttled off for rote tasks that they want to gain efficiencies from. So leaders are in the failure gap. They're struggling with this. They might not even know they're in the failure gap. And one of the things I'm hoping that folks here can do is take back to your teams or your clients or whoever you're working with and talk to them about this space between agreeing that it sounds like a good idea and getting aligned and actually doing something with it for themselves as leaders in the organization. They need to get their hands on the keyboard. And I would suggest that that's because we actually don't have a technology problem. Who here thinks AI is awesome, like it does everything great? No, right? It's not. But it's not the problem, because the AI that you use today, the AI that you are interacting with right now today, it's the worst AI you're ever going to use. It's just getting better every single day, right? So it's the astronomical advances that are happening every day, every week, every month means that whatever you're using today is literally the worst it will ever be. And if you think about it through that lens, then it starts to feel like I should figure this out, right? Like I should be in here using it, even though it's not perfect, even though I know there are limitations, even though there are things that might not be great. It's not a technology limitation, but we are seeing that leaders are not getting activated around it. And there's a few reasons for it that I want to talk through here today. Leaders are being left behind because they're not willing to lean in and learn quite yet. And one of the reasons why some of them say that is because they say the technology isn't there yet. But it is. It absolutely can help them to be better leaders today, as well as changing what gets done in their organizations. If we want to have AI-powered cultures, which you may or may not want, but it's something to think about, right? If we want AI to be a part of our culture and be accepted as a tool that people can use to do what they do better and also do how they do it better in both ways, then we need for leaders to really model the way. We need for them to embrace this opportunity to change how they're leading, to integrate these tools into that process. But there are a few things that are getting in the way. And that is leader behavior. Remember those 30,000 decisions that leaders are making every single day? We're all doing it. Senior leaders in organizations, that number can get up to like 60,000. They're trying to crank through an enormous amount of data, an enormous amount of decisions in terms of how they lead. And so they're on autopilot with a lot of decisions, including how they spend their time, right? And that's often what keeps leaders in the failure gap, is they're thinking about, oh, I need to go work on the budget, and I need to go have this tough employee conversation, I need to do all these other things. I'm very strategic, right? So I got to do strategic things. And they're not thinking about how do I learn and grow my skill set and improve the tools that are in my toolkit. And that's a fundamental shift in mindset that we need leaders to go through. At Karrikins Group, we look at that kind of change through the lens of our behavior model. And there's more about it in the book. You can check that out in detail and in the white papers that are on your table as well. But let's just take a quick spin through it here. If we go from right to left, and by the way, this works in life as well as with leadership. If we go from right to left, if you think about the new outcomes that you want, so I wanted to go to the gym and get fit, in my example, or we want leaders using AI, then we need people to make different decisions and exhibit different behaviors, right? Fundamentally, this all makes sense so far, right? That means that the trade-offs around how you spend your time and the blockers that you're navigating, those need to shift. And we know that those get shifted through three key influencers. In organizations and in leadership, we know that we have to grapple as leaders with mindsets, group dynamics, and organizational factors. Now, let me ask you a question. I want you to think about a leadership team that you're on or that you work with. Okay, just like think about it for a minute. Get your mind wrapped around those people. Now, you're going to say to those people, we've got 2 hours to spend together. And I'm going to give you a choice. We can either really talk a lot about your mindsets and how you're orienting towards AI, what your fears are, what your concerns are, what are you worried about, right? We can have that conversation for 2 hours, individual mindsets. Or we can sit around this table and we can really grapple with the group dynamics that are holding us back. What's getting in the way? Like, let's really get gritty about it. Let's understand what our group dynamics are that are problematic and are keeping us in the failure gap. Or option 3, we can see this super cool demo from an AI vendor who's going to help us cut our costs by 30%. Which of those 3 options is your team going to choose? Number 3, right? Every day. Number 3 every day and 6 times on Sunday, right? Yeah, because really, this idea of how do we understand the mindsets and the group dynamics that are getting in the way of us aligning and delivering on the promises of transformation, it's hard work. It seems like it should be easy, but it isn't. It seems like we should just be able to change our minds and do it, right? I should just be able to change my mind and not hit the snooze button, but get up and go to the gym. That's how easy it is. Think about any habit you've ever tried to make or break. And you're trying to interrupt all of those habits and routines, all of those 30,000 decisions that you just have on autopilot as a leader. And you're trying to decide to do something differently, to lead differently as you go forward and to use a new tool, put a new tool in your toolkit. And it's actually incredibly hard. Now, the reason that we think it's easy, it's a bit of a fallacy of it should be easy. And this is, by the way, this is true for all of the habits that you try and make and break, right? This fallacy that it should be easy is caused because most of the outcomes that we're working towards are things that fundamentally would make us happy, right? So we think, oh, it would make me happy if I went to the gym and got in better shape and was healthier. It would make me happier if I was a better leader. It would make me happier if I was able to get to that outcome. In general, would you agree that the outcomes that you work towards when you're trying to change something would ultimately make you a happier person? Yeah? I see some heads nodding. Yeah. So we think that, but the reality is that the brain is not wired for happiness. The brain is wired for efficiency. The brain is trying to get through those 30,000 decisions as fast as it possibly can because it's trying to do all this work. And it's just exhausting. Like, life can be exhausting. Does everybody ever feel exhausted? Right? Like, we all get a little exhausted sometimes. Our brain's trying to get us through a really complex, fast-moving, and difficult world as effectively and efficiently as possible. And what's the secret for that? Habits and routines. So disrupting those habits and routines requires very intentionally shifting mindsets and group dynamics. And when we think about AI, there are a lot of mindsets and group dynamics that are getting in the way for leaders today. There's a lot of ego around it. And just like back in the 1990s, there was a degree of ego from leaders around typing, right? Learning the skill of typing. That was considered a low-level task, a low-level job, something that senior leaders didn't do. And so that got in the way of a lot of leaders really getting effective at using PCs, using computers. So we're seeing that today with AI, where there's a belief that AI is great for rote tasks. But I'm a very important leader. I'm busy doing strategery, right? Like, I'm in this space. And so I don't have time to go do that stuff. And besides, there's nothing AI could do that I can't do better. There is a very strong mindset around that. There's a lot of mistrust. They've read a lot of articles and they've seen news and maybe experienced themselves that AI can give you wrong answers, right? It's like, yeah, AI can give you wrong answers. But they're betting millions and millions of dollars on AI implementations. They're taking huge risks. They're defending AI implementations to their boards. They're advocating for AI use amongst their employees, but they're not using it themselves because they have these things that are holding them back. There's also, by the way, and I don't know if anybody else has seen this, I'll be interested both virtually and for the folks in the room to get a show of hands on this one, but we have observed with some of the clients that we work with that there is a fear that you'll be seen as cheating. Or like, if you need to use AI to do the work that we do as senior leaders, maybe you don't belong in this room. Maybe you're not supposed to be here if you need to get help. Like, that's seen as somehow cheating for senior leaders who are doing this heavy work, this heavy knowledge work. So I'm just curious, anybody seen or a leadership team where that has existed? There's a couple of hands going up, and virtually just drop in the chat if you're seeing that as well. Yeah, it's something that's really kind of deep inside and it's not always on the surface, but we're definitely seeing that as a mindset and group dynamic shift that needs to happen if we want leaders to fully embrace AI. Now, why do I share this with you here today in this room from a culture perspective? Because these are things that are heavily culturally informed. And as we think about trying to drive AI adoption and really think about how it's having an impact on our organizations, making these things visible and giving leaders language to talk about what's happening with them and what's holding them back and what's keeping them from being inspired to change how they lead, a lot of it is here. It's not the organizational factors. So companies today are spending a lot of time and money on new platforms, on applications that are AI driven, on making selections, on legal policies, on HR policies, on how many people, by the way, have restrictions on what type of AI you can use. Yeah, right? So that's a great example of an organizational factor, right? How many of you have had somebody have a conversation with you about the mindset you need to bring into using AI, right? Nobody, right? Nobody talks about that. We need to have those conversations, especially with leaders in the organization. What I'd like to do is share a couple of the shifts that we're seeing really regularly with some of the teams that we work with, and then give you an opportunity to share some of what you're observing. One shift is this one from It's Just Google on Steroids. Anybody heard this? Yeah. 18 months ago, this was me. 18 months ago, I was like, what's this whole AI thing? Like, it looks like it's just a really big Google. I didn't understand it, right? Like, I had to make a choice. I had to interrupt those 30,000 leadership habits and routines that I was in and say, even as the CEO of my organization, I think I need to figure this out. Because I think it's Google on steroids, but other people seem to be doing a lot more with it. So I had to invest the time and spend energy, which is a trade-off that I had to make, to really learn more about it and think about how it was getting implemented for both the Karrikins Group organization and the clients that we serve. Just getting a leader who's in that 30% of people who have never used AI to understand this, that this is a mindset that they have, can go so far with helping them to quickly start to grab onto AI as a tool that they can use in a very different way. So if you're struggling with some of the leaders in your organizations or with your clients to get them rolling on it, tackling this particular mindset and making it visible can be a real important shift to make as you go forward. Another shift that we're seeing a lot is this idea that AI is best for rote tasks. Anybody see this one happening, popping up in their organizations? Yeah, I see some heads nodding. We see this a lot. So what does this do culturally? This says AI is for people who do routine things. And that means it's not for leaders whose jobs are very busy and they're very different. And I've literally had leaders say to me, I don't have the same day twice. Anybody ever feel like you don't have the same day twice? So how can AI possibly help me if I don't ever have the same day twice? Because there's a really deeply held mindset that if, loan processing or low-level customer service calls, those kinds of things that can be made routine, great. But my job is more complex than that. That's a really big mindset shift, especially for senior leaders in organizations. And again, making it visible and being willing to have the conversation about it can go really far as you look to make AI more normalized within your culture. Because as long as leaders are orienting this way towards AI, again, they're sending a signal to the organization that this isn't for people who want to move up, right? This isn't for people who want to have senior level jobs. It's for people who have low level jobs. It's the same attitude that people had towards typing in the 1990s, right? Oh, you're typing? What are you, a secretary, right? There was that kind of attitude from people. And so we're trying to shift that. And one way to successfully navigate these shifts is to make them visible, to have the conversation about them. A third shift that I want to shed a light on is I can't use it if it isn't perfect. Does anybody feel this way themselves? I kind of do sometimes. I'm like, oh man, like it's going to give me the wrong answer. When I was teaching people how to use spreadsheets, and I'm so glad there are a couple Lotus 1, 2, 3 people in here. I love that. It was such a great application. I can remember being in the classroom and teaching a group of people, particularly data entry people, and they would put all of the numbers in the column, and then they would put the sum function at the bottom, and they would look at the answer, and then what would they do? The next thing they would do is they would pull out their calculator, and they would add up all the numbers, and they would double check to make sure that the spreadsheet had gotten the right answer, right? So it looks like a few other people have had that experience as well. Yeah, because they didn't trust it. They didn't trust that this spreadsheet could do it. These days, we're all pretty confident that Excel will add up a column of numbers correctly. But what do we worry about? What do we worry about instead? We don't double check the formula, but we might double check the data entry, right? Did we get the right numbers in there? We might double check formulas, especially if they're really complex formulas. And I encourage leaders to start orienting towards AI in a similar way. AI will give you good answers if you ask it the right questions, but you need to be talking with your colleagues, you need to be talking with your teams about how are they getting to AI-generated answers. What's the process that they're taking? Because understanding that will help you to determine if you're getting good quality answers. But leaders who are in that 30% who have never used AI, they don't even have a framework for that. They don't even have a way of conceptualizing that outside of their analogy, which is it should work like a spreadsheet. I should be able to put in a formula and get the right answer. And AI is never going to be like that because it's generative, right? It's changing all the time. And we need leaders to start to understand that dynamic nature of AI as they go forward. So this is a big one that we're tackling right now. And then the last one I'm going to share is this idea that, again, as I mentioned before, we're the strategic thinkers. Like, we're in this room because we know how to figure this stuff out. We don't need help getting to the right strategy. We don't need help making tough decisions. We don't need help engaging in that way. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in this room. And this is actually, I think, one of the biggest blockers that we're seeing. And so again, if you're working with leadership teams right now that feel a little stuck, this is a good one to work to shed some light on and to start to have some conversations about. Because especially if you're a vendor, by the way, and you're bringing AI into an organization, this idea that that's great for you and for the work that you're going to go do with my employees, but I don't really need to deal with it at my level. I just need to make the strategic investment decision. That's a very different modality than being a user of AI. And what we want to encourage leaders to do is to get their hands on the keyboard, to start using AI so that they understand what some of these complexities are that their people are grappling with, and so that they can build a culture where AI is appropriately leveraged in their organization. I would go so far as to suggest that prompt writing is, for 2026, what typing was for 1996, back in the day. Leaders should have the basics. I don't care if they're two-finger typing, figuratively, but they should have the basics of what it means to use AI in this way. And I really appreciated Artrell yesterday giving us a framework for how do you think about writing a great prompt. We don't need senior leaders to be prompt engineers. It's not their job. But they should know enough to be able to get in there and ask good questions, right? And start to experiment with and play with these amazing tools that are starting to emerge. So those are some of the shifts that we're observing in the work that we're doing at Karrikins Group. And I'm just curious for all of you, what are some of the shifts that you're seeing either with your teams or with your clients as you think about what's holding senior leaders back from really getting engaged with AI beyond being comfortable saying, yeah, it's great for other people. We want to know what's getting in the way of them really understanding what makes it great for them. How can they be a better leader? And I'm going to give you just about 5 minutes at your tables to have a discussion. For the folks who are virtual, we're going to send you into some breakouts and give you the opportunity just to share with each other. What are some of the small shifts in mindsets or group dynamics that you're seeing that would be so great for the leaders in your organization if they would tackle it and then start to engage with AI as users, not just as investors in the technology for other people. And if you're sitting at a table by yourself, I'll invite you to join up with somebody else if you want to. But again, I'm going to give you just 3, 4, 5 minutes to have that conversation, and then we'll do a quick debrief around the room. Does that sound good? All right, knock yourselves out. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. All right, let's start to bring it back together. I was hearing some good conversations. Bring our folks back from the virtual breakouts. I think we've got some mic runners around. Yep, we do indeed. All right, I would love to hear 2, 3 examples of conversations that people were having. Any hands going up? And virtual folks, we're coming to you. There's a hand up in the very back corner over here. Yeah.
So, my 2 colleagues actually had almost the opposite problem. Like, her leaders are using it, gung-ho about it. Ben's are getting up to speed with it. What I found in my organization is that specifically the executives, when we position AI as a tool in your tool belt, for some reason, the unconscious assumption goes to, oh, it's a dumb thing, it's just a hammer, it's not of much value. But if I position it, when I talk to them, I position it as a thought partner, as a strategic assistant, whatever have you, but not use the word tool, for some reason, the attitude towards it changes. And I hate the word, I will never use it, I hate it. But for some reason, that association, and nothing against hammers or people who work with hammers, but it's this idea of, well, this is something that, I don't just need a tool. I need something more sophisticated.
Yep.
For some reason, that makes it click.
It's a great example of a mindset, right? Again, we talk about that mindset of the reason I'm in the job I'm in is because I'm capable of really complex thought. And, I've solved really big problems in the past in my career that have gotten me here, right? We see all of these mindsets that come in, and we might not like to acknowledge some of them, quite frankly, but they're really important to get out on the table because it holds us back from really taking advantage of things, not just with AI, but in all kinds of transformations. But I think that mindset of, I don't need another tool, like I've got my hammers, thank you very much, and I know how to use them, to this can really be an advisor or a partner for you. That's a really nice shift to think about as we try and get these people inspired to move out of agreement that it sounds like a good idea and into alignment that we can actually make something happen with it. Yeah, let's see if there's one other hand up from over on this side of the room, and then we'll come to the virtual space. Anyone else have a good example they want to share? Oh, we've got one hand up right back there.
Hi, Darren Harris from Living Giving Enterprises.
Yeah.
This is too risky, too much security risk. I'm going to be a drag and just say no.
Yeah.
Can't do it.
Yeah, I love it. That mindset of this is too much risk. One of the things that I love to just remind executives about is that this is moving really fast. The PC revolution took 10 years to really take hold. This is going to take months, not years. And so if you wait until it's completely de-risked and everybody else around you has done it, you're going to be so far behind that you are not going to be able to catch up. So your competitors are moving, your customers are moving, your markets are moving. And how do you start to shift your own mindset around risk tolerance when it comes to systems? And so I think that's a really interesting question to be able to conversation to be able to have with people about what's driving the mindset around risk tolerance, not what system do we need to put in place to manage the risk. Yeah, thank you.
So my wife works for a veterinary information company, millions and millions and millions of dollars in drug references, right? So the risk, I just want to make this real so we can actually have a conversation. The risk is really high for that company.
Yeah.
They get their stuff taken, millions of dollars of money and time and et cetera. That actually happened to them. A company, we think outside of Russia, stole all their data, right? So just to push a little bit on this notion of that some of these are not unfounded, these mindsets. And so how do we really lean in and have conversations like this with these folks, right?
These are not easy conversations, and they are often legitimate, so not to downplay that. And some of the resistance points from leaders is they're the 30% that have actually never used the tool themselves. So they've made decisions for the rest of the organization without having that context and that fluency. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. So I think it's a very fair point. Very real risks, but you need to lean into them and not away from them. And how do you shift that mindset? Let's hear from the folks virtually and see if there's an example that anybody wants to share virtually. Jennifer, I think, is going to grab the mic there.
Oh, okay, I got it here. So one thing that's coming up is, the classic time barrier. Leaders already have so much on their plates, it's difficult for them to take the time to not only learn which tools are available, but to sit down and actually understand the tool. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great point, right? People are very busy. And again, 30,000 plus decisions every single day. We are all busy. We are all very, very busy. Changing how you lead takes a lot of time and energy. But I think one of the real fallacies that people have in that busyness is that small shifts done consistently over time change the world. If you start right now as a leader, just understanding the tools at a really basic level, not at a level that puts your data at risk, not at a level that bets millions of dollars on it, but at a level that is $20 a month to use the tool and to understand it through that lens, that actually doesn't take that much time. And I think really getting behind the mindset of what is it that you fear or that you're concerned about that gets deeper than I don't have time, that gets you into the trade-off that they're making, because they're trading off spending time on one thing to spend time on something else. And the ask can be really small for leaders, just to get them fluent, get them understanding these tools in different ways, rather than having to go learn, spend 3 days in a class trying to learn a new system. Again, they don't have to be prompt engineers, but they should understand what it means to write a prompt. Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. All right, these are some great examples, and let's talk a little bit about what activation really looks like. By the way, in the Ironman now, we're out of the swim, we're on the bike, we're like moving through. We might be off the bike at this point, we're in transition. I was famous in triathlons, by the way, for how long I took in transitions. Because I was like, if I'm gonna be running a marathon, I wanna be comfortable. I wasn't trying to light the world on fire, I was just trying to get done. But yeah, so we're getting there. Anybody feel like it's an endurance event, or are you doing okay? Yeah, you're doing okay. Good. I'm glad. Glad to hear that. All right, let's talk about activating leaders around some of this, because breaking through some of these mindsets and group dynamic shifts is really challenging. Again, we're trying to get through a lot of noise in the system. So leaders start strong, right? There's often a lot of excitement. They see the dog and pony show. They're like, oh yeah, this is great. We're going to do this. This is so fun, right? And then what happens? We've all been on this roller coaster, right? Does this look familiar to anybody? Like you go to the January kickoff and it's like, this is going to be the best year ever. We're going to make this happen. We're going to be a totally different company by the end of the year, right? Or like you do your New Year's resolution and you're like, I'm going to be a totally different person by the end of the year. And what is, I think it's January 8th or the second Friday in January is Quitter's Day, right? That's when everybody just stops with their New Year's resolutions. So we see this transformation flop. And that's because, why? Leaders are busy. They have day jobs. They have business as usual. They have deeply embedded habits and routines that they're working through. And it's really hard to sustain that level of energy and commitment over time. What we really like to see from leaders during times of transformation, and we're seeing this with AI transformations that are happening, is for leaders to maintain what we call a successful simmer. And this successful simmer means you don't get to crater all the way back to business as usual, but you do need to continue to invest some time and energy in learning for yourself. Leaders love to kick it off and then be like, okay, you go make it happen, right? That's great. I'm all behind you. But I'm behind you. I'm not next to you, right? So how do we think about inspiring leaders to really step up and start to take ownership of their own activation in these spaces of digital transformation and these days around AI? From Karrikins Group's perspective, one of the things that we like to draw a distinction between for leaders is the distinction between change management and leader activation. Change management is a pretty well-solved problem. All through the 90s, we had Prosci and Cotter and other great thinkers helping us to understand what does it take to really change what people do. So I want you to go from system A to system B. It's still really hard, by the way. It's still a hard job, but it's pretty well understood. But this space of leader activation has often been left unattended during transformations. And we see a very specific, different set of activities that are required to activate leaders in their own transformation. And these 8 activities are things that leaders need to take on. Notice that nowhere in there does it say learn the new system, right? We're not asking them to learn the details of how to do some of the things that other people in the organization need to do. But we are asking them to get fluent in the new technology. We're asking them to really model the way for others in terms of how they're asking questions, what they're engaging in. I have a very fond memory. Anybody done an ERP implementation? Yeah, a few hands up. Okay, they're fun, aren't they? Yeah, I have a very fond or not so fond memory of a CFO who did a whole ERP implementation, but he still insisted that his board reports get done in Excel. And so what were his people doing? They were taking the data out of the ERP and putting it into Excel, and then they were giving him his reports. And then he was complaining to me about the fact that he wasn't getting his ROI. I'm like, yeah, dude, that's because you're not activating your own change. You don't have to learn how to use the ERP, but you do have to learn how to use the reports that come out of it, right? Get fluent in that process. We're seeing this happening with AI right now as well. So what we want to do is think about how do we get leaders really activated in this space? And I want to give you just a very quick example using 3 of these. By the way, if you look at that list of 8, are there any that jump out at you where you're like, if our leaders would do that one thing, it would make a huge difference in our culture? Anyone that jumps out? Yeah. Modeling the way, yeah, absolutely. If they model the way, which means they're using it. Right now, we see a lot of leaders, because they're not using AI, their people are afraid to use AI. Leaders aren't saying, well, here's how I'm using it to be a better leader, so their people can be comfortable saying, oh, I generated this report with the help of AI, right? How do you model the way? Anyone else? Yeah.
Creating the space.
Creating the space for new connections, right? Like, how do you help people understand how to connect the dots with this new technology? That's a great one. Like, leaders, they just don't take the time to do it, right? Again, there's a trade-off in there, but they don't have the language for it. And so people don't understand, what's the place for this? How does this make sense within my organization? Yeah. Any others jump out? Yeah, challenging legacy mindsets. They're usually the carriers of the legacy mindsets, so they've got to challenge them for themselves so that they can help others to change. Cool. All of these will make a difference in culturally how your organization adopts new technologies if leaders lean into it. But can you see how this is distinctly different from change management? You got to do change management, absolutely, but you need to be really intentional also about leader activation when it comes to implementing AI in your organization. I want to just look at 3 of these: building fluency, sharing personal challenges in learning, and changing the questions that they're asking. And just look at them through the lens of ethical AI. When you think about ethical AI, this is really an emerging field, right? And so I think Fatima and Katie and Daniel did a great job of hosting a conversation that led to some of this as well. When we think about the idea of ethical AI, it also is about your culture, right? It's about how you're choosing to use these tools with your employees, with your customers, and with your partners. And I just want to think about those 3 questions of fluency, personal challenges, and changing the questions that are being asked through a couple of areas of ethical use. One is accountability. So what do we mean by accountability? Accountability is human in the loop. Where are my duckdenity people from the pre-conference? My duckdenity people, yeah, we got a few of them. What did we come up with? AI proposes, humans decide, right? Like that's what we were talking about, this idea of human in the loop. And what are the decisions that are appropriate for AI to be making versus the ones that you can make for yourself, that we need to have more human oversight in? When we think about accountability, leaders who are in that 30% that have literally never used an AI engine, they don't have the model, they don't have the language model for themselves of how to talk with vendors, about how to talk with their colleagues, about how are we bringing AI into the decision-making processes. And they run the risk of ceding accountability to AI. By the way, the ones who are really afraid of the risk of using AI, so we talked about that a minute ago, that mindset of it's too risky, a lot of times they also don't understand this idea of accountability. How are they maintaining accountability? And I think about it, if we go back to the spreadsheet example, it's like you don't have to double check that the number is summing correctly, but you probably need to have oversight of your financial analysts who are building complex formulas to give you your results, right? So where do you insert oversight into the structure and maintain that human level of accountability? Getting fluent in the language of AI and starting to understand how it works a little bit helps leaders to make better decisions about accountability in their organizations. The same thing with transparency. What do we mean by transparency? Transparency is all about the data that you're using to make decisions or to come up with what's happening in AI, how the data is being used, and then who it's impacting, right? So we actually at Karrikins Group got a letter from one of our longtime clients who's on the S&P 500. They're a very large organization. And they sent us a letter saying, oh, we're going to renegotiate our MSA this year. Great. That happens with big clients. We do that periodically. And you're going to do that with an AI negotiator. We're like, oh, well, that kind of feels different, right? Because we have these long-standing relationships with the CEO, with the head of procurement, with all these very fancy people. Like, we want to lean on those relationships in our negotiation, right? But in the email, it said, we've gotten your current MSA. We've looked across all of our other MSAs with similar partners, and the AI negotiator is going to be the first stop in this negotiation. And if you can't successfully complete it there, then we'll have a conversation. So there was a lot of transparency in what we were going to have to come into. And that allowed my colleague who was managing that to prepare differently. He didn't just show up and get hit with an AI negotiator, right? So that level of transparency tells me that leadership team has activated their own understanding of AI. And we happen to know that leadership team pretty well, and they are active users of AI models. So they're able to have that level of fluency to think about it through the lens of their personal experiences and to ask different questions of vendors about what do we really need to think about if we're going to roll out this AI negotiation tool. I would contrast that with a friend of mine who's on the job market right now and recently got on a call with what he thought was a recruiter, only to find about 3 minutes into the conversation that he was talking with an AI that had introduced itself as a person with a person's name. And this is a very big company that he was interviewing with, by the way, and no transparency for him at all about what data they were using to conduct the interview, what was going to happen with his data as he shared it with this AI platform, and just the fact that he wasn't talking with a human, right? He didn't even know that. And so he ended up just having some fun with the AI. I won't tell you what he did, but he was like, I don't want to work for this company anyway, right? But it's that kind of transparency tells me that at a leadership level in that organization, those leaders are not fluent in what questions they need to be asking of the vendors as they think about implementing these kinds of tools and resources. They haven't actually used it in a way that gives them some personal experience to think about asking different questions. So they're asking the same old deeply habituated questions that they always ask vendors about how they're going to implement their tools, but they're not going the extra mile and thinking about it through the lens of AI. And that's the risk. That's the real problem with leaders who aren't taking the time right now to learn a little bit about AI. Again, we're not asking them to be super users. We just want them to get their hands on the keyboard. We want them to peck out a few prompts, right? To really understand, what do these tools do? What are their limitations? And how can they help you? And that helps them to be better leaders in the organization because they have a better understanding of this new business context. If you go all the way back to the 1990s and imagine a leader who didn't bother to know anything about PCs, it becomes very quickly very hard for them to have a conversation with their colleagues about how they're doing their work. They don't know what questions to ask, right? Because they've never used it themselves. So personal experience is what we're going for here, and it really does matter when it comes to activation. The last one I want to talk about here is challenging bias, because this is actually a deeply cultural issue that we're seeing emerge when it comes to AI activation. And this is a space where we touched on it a little bit yesterday with Fatima, I think, and Katie as well. But particularly when we think about who's using AI in the workplace, I'll give you an example that just came out of Harvard, where a group of engineers submitted identical code to independent observers, identical code that was AI generated to independent observers, and had that code reviewed. And the female engineers were consistently rated lower than the male engineers. And in fact, the female engineers were attributed as being less capable, being in need of help. Oh, they must need help to solve these really complicated coding problems. The male engineers were attributed with being strategic, innovative, creative, even brave for trying these new tools. And we're seeing those kinds of reflections happening that reflect deeply held biases in organizations. There's nothing, I just want to bring that up as something that we need to be aware of. And again, leaders need to be thinking about their own mindsets. What are they bringing into the leadership conversations? How are they orienting towards the people who are making visible that they're using AI to help them be more strategic, to help them make better decisions? What are the assumptions that they're making about those people? Because that drives the culture in the organization. And I think we have to be really aware and be really honest with ourselves around how those biases are coming in and how they're showing up in the AI space if we want people to be comfortable and confident using these tools. Leaders lead the way. Who said modeling the way? I think you said modeling the way, right? If leaders are actively modeling the way and saying, yeah, I'm using these tools. I'm not using them the same way you are. I'm not using them to make my loan processing faster, but I am using them to help me to be a better leader. Then you drive confidence in the organization that it's okay to use these tools and it's okay to make that visible. You're not going to be criticized or thought of as not being a good thinker in that space. So this is a really important thing to be thinking about as you work with leaders or as you're leading in your own organizations, is how are you setting the standard for people to leverage these tools as effectively as possible? All right, so a little bit about ethical AI and thinking about it through this lens of building fluency, sharing personal challenges, and changing the questions being asked. When we think about that from an activation perspective, if leaders can just tackle these things, they're going to go so far with this kind of implementation. They're going to accelerate their organization's ability to adopt and leverage AI. We're not going to do this table discussion because we're coming up on the end of the run here. We're in the last part of the marathon. But I do want to just mention that enterprise leaders really can spark building a culture that can appropriately incorporate AI and the tools that it has as we go through this. The thing is, though, I want everyone in this room, because you're all involved in culture and in change and you're helping people through this, I just want you to remember that it does take courage. And I really appreciate the comment from the back around risk, because it takes a lot of courage for leaders to change how they lead, as much as it takes for other people to change what they do. And I really love this quote from Marianne Rodmacher. She likes to say, courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes courage is the quiet voice at the end of the day saying, I will try again tomorrow. We're not asking these leaders to run into burning buildings. We're not asking them to bet their careers. We're asking them to come back tomorrow and try something a little different, to try and incorporate a new asset in how they lead, to start to think differently about what it means to leverage this emerging toolkit or partner, or however we want to frame it, to really change how they lead. If you think about it through the lens of the behavior model, we want them to get to those different outcomes and really drive that energy in their organizations. So I would just encourage all of you to really think about how you can help your leaders through the failure gap, and think about it through the lens of leader activation, not change management. Remember, senior leaders in the organization, change management is about what people do. We need to inspire them in terms of how they lead. And so these activation steps will help them to shift that in small but meaningful ways. We're not asking them to do huge shifts. We like to talk about nudges, not shoves. If you're trying to think about a couple of things that you can take away from this, help them to focus on being visible, embracing AI visibly as a tool, and shifting their own habits while they're also asking other people to really change what they do. At Karrikins Group, we like to say, to go fast, go alone, to go far, go together, to go far fast, get aligned. And that's how you make how matter. So if you're trying to think about what you can take away from this, we've got some additional tools and resources in the back. Feel free to stop by. We'd love to say hello. You've got the books, you've got the white papers as well on your tables. And I would love to connect with you directly. If you want to, you can scan the code and say hello or connect with me on LinkedIn. Either way, it's been a really great morning with all of you. Great day yesterday getting to know many of you and hear about the amazing things that you're doing in your organizations. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to talk with you today. And I'm going to turn it back over.
Awesome. Thank you, Julie.